As you know, Joel Pollak lives amongst the Democrats. He lives in L.A. County, I think, or at least Santa Monica, that is. And it's a very Democrat place, and he studies them, with sort of the interest of a, you know, I don't want to say like a
Zoologist?
zoologist or an anthropologist. Let's put it that way. And so I think because he lives amongst them and he focuses on them, it's fun to be a Republican like a conservative oriented guy
You're
covering
talking about him like he's
Republicans.
Jane Goodall right now.
Yeah, well, but if you're a conservative person and you cover Democrats and you do so not in a gotcha way, but in a
Sure.
let me try and understand way. And that's the thing. I wish that there's so many journalists on the left that cover conservatives and right wingers and Republicans in a gotcha way, in an attack-ish war room style way. One of the things I like most about Joel Pollak is that he's actually very fair-minded. And he genuinely wants to know what makes the other side tick. And we have him standing by in his home. It is 3 hours earlier out there, 5:18 p.m. Pacific time, so I don't think we have results from there yet. Let's go to Joel Pollak from Breitbart.com. Joel, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you see me okay?
I sure can. And my friend Sheila Gunn Reid is on with us, and I was just praising you. Don't mind me, because I like the style with which you approach the Democrats. You're not, I mean, it's tempting to mock and it's tempting to poke fun, but it's more useful to understand and to try and get in to understand their thinking and their ideologies and the criminology behind things. Give us a little bit of what's really going on in the midterms here from the Democrat point of view. What are their goals? I mean, besides just stanching the red wave, what are the Democrats trying to achieve? How are they trying to position themselves? Are they thinking about 2024? Are there issues that they're making their central focus? Are they trying to shuck off their coronavirus policies? What does it mean to be a Democrat in the 2022 midterms?
Well, that's an excellent question that nobody in the American media has asked. It takes someone from outside the country and someone of your insight to ask the very basic question about what Democrats hoped to achieve in this election. If you listen to them carefully, you can see what they are trying to do. Essentially, the case they were making to their own voters for much of the year was that there are great things that they wish to do that Republicans are preventing them from doing in the Senate. And they need more Senate seats to be able to pass certain legislation and to be able to get rid of the filibuster threshold for passing legislation in the Senate in particular. We have 100 seats in the Senate. You need 60 seats to end debate on a question and move to a vote. If the other party can muster more than 40 votes against ending debate, they can filibuster and block a vote from taking place. The Democrats also tried to reassure their voters that they would hold on to the House of Representatives despite the fact that congressional districts were going to be redrawn. The Democrats put a great deal of effort into trying to gerrymander the districts in their favor. So they started this year with a clear set of goals, which was to pass more radical legislation than the current system would allow them to do. That's really the overall goal of the Democratic Party in this election. That was lost along the way for reasons that have to do with setbacks to the Democratic Party as well as victories for the Democratic Party, or at least motivations for the Democratic Party. The big setback was their plans to gerrymander some of the districts in the states they controlled failed when they were defeated by the federal courts. In New York and in Maryland in particular, Democratic state legislatures tried to redraw districts to write Republicans essentially out of the picture. And in New York and Maryland, the courts said no. So the Democrats could not do that, and Republicans gained a slight edge in the redistricting, which happens every 10 years after the census. Democrats then ran into trouble on inflation, which Joe Biden said was transitory and which Democrats pretended wasn't a real problem. He ran into trouble on gas prices. There was also a general crisis of confidence in his leadership hanging over from last year when the U.S. had a disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. Biden seemed more preoccupied with Ukraine and the Ukrainian border than the American southern border. People are very concerned about crime. And the Biden administration refused to do anything about crime in the cities. Now, that's not strictly speaking up to them, but the Democratic Party had backed these left-wing prosecutors in many major American urban areas who had presided over crime waves that were the result of a variety of factors, but largely the Black Lives Matter movement, which Biden and the Democrats supported, delegitimizing police, in some cases leading to police funding being cut. Defund the police was the slogan on the radical left. And Democrats often tried to show that they agreed with that. They would say redirect funding. That was the term Biden used. But they just would not stand up to George Soros, who was funding 75 of these prosecutors across the nation. And as crime became more and more of a problem, including for liberal voters in these Democrat-run cities, there began to be a sense that the Biden administration simply wasn't dealing with the realities of the average American voter. So all of that made it harder for Biden to get his message across, which is that Democrats needed 1 or 2 extra votes to end the filibuster and pass massive spending bills, to expand the Supreme Court, and then eventually to, as he puts it, to codify Roe versus Wade. That became an issue that was a benefit to Democrats when, over the summer, the Supreme Court struck down the Roe versus Wade precedent, which the Supreme Court decided guaranteed a right to abortion for Americans. That was decided in 1973. Essentially, at that time, the Supreme Court made it up. They tried to discover that right through a reading of the 14th Amendment and so forth. It's very complicated. But basically, they said there's a right to abortion, even though the Constitution doesn't provide for one. And that decision has been controversial for half a century. It was ultimately overturned in the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Center of Mississippi. So that decision came down, and then Democrats got very excited and said, you see, this is why we need to vote. We need to make sure that we vote out all of these Republican senators, make sure we get more Democratic senators who will confirm left-wing judges, who will restore Roe versus Wade, and we need to codify Roe versus Wade by getting rid of the filibuster. So that did seem to elevate enthusiasm among the core of the Democratic Party, but they ran into trouble with inflation sticking around, with gas prices rising again at the end of the summer, and also with the border, because the border crisis became very intense, and Governor Ron DeSantis and other Republican governors in the South eventually said, you know, we can't deal with this on our own. We're going to start sending these border crossers, these migrants, millions of them, north, so we can share the burden a little bit here, because these little border towns are being completely overwhelmed. Once these migrants arrived in liberal cities and liberal enclaves like Martha's Vineyard, the Democrats didn't know what to do with them. They just couldn't face the consequences of their own policies. That was a very important moment. And it showed that Democrats really just don't have any handle on governing in this country. Then I think the most important moment, and I'll finish with this, the most important moment came on September 1st, when Joe Biden gave a very chilling speech about how Republicans were a danger to democracy. And this built off the narrative Democrats had been pushing about January 6th. Democrats put a lot of effort into the January 6th committee, the various investigations. They basically tried to argue that Republicans are a danger to the republic because so many of them support Donald Trump, and Donald Trump tried to have the results sent back to the states and overturned or whatever, and they associated him with Capitol riot, which they call an insurrection, and so forth. And they spent a lot of time and energy on that, and Biden gave a speech basically saying that half the country was a threat to democracy, and a few days before he had called Republicans semi-fascist. I don't know how many Americans were convinced by that. Probably some Democrats already agreed with him, but to give a speech like that when the country was already suffering from economic crisis, when there was a crisis at the border, when the threat of nuclear war was growing in Europe, it just told voters that Biden's primary concern, remember, this was a major address in prime time at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, big setup. It told voters that his primary concern was politics. It wasn't the economy. It wasn't crime. It wasn't homelessness. It wasn't border security. Joe Biden was concerned with politics. And at that point, Republicans started to enjoy a resurgence, and that has continued until now. And no matter how many different ways Democrats have tried to change the momentum of the race, they are in some ways hoisted by their own petard, because they were the ones who pushed for early voting in previous elections. Now that we've got early voting in many states, I think Republicans have actually turned out early. Republicans still tend to vote on election day, but Republican early voting numbers went up. And so there wasn't much that Biden and the Democrats could do to change the narrative once people decided they were willing to do anything to vote out this party. So the Democratic message has become completely lost and scrambled and garbled. They started out wanting more power to pursue left-wing programs. They were tripped up by the results of those programs, which led to high inflation, high crime, and border insecurity. And they just couldn't change course. Joe Biden is terrified of the left. Even in the closing days before the election, he was promising to end oil drilling and to shut down coal plants. That's a shock to the left. In 2008, by the way, he promised the opposite. When he was on the campaign trail for Obama, he promised to keep the coal plants open. So this was something that Democrats just simply had no answer for. And basically, they have no message except that Republicans are against democracy. And that's the message they took to a Democratic election. Judging by the results as they're coming in so far, a lot of Americans voted against democracy because people just didn't seem to care what the Democrats were saying.
I'm going to let Sheila ask you a question in 1 second, but first I just got to ask you, because I know you wrote a book about it 2 years ago called Neither Free Nor Fair, the 2020 U.S. presidential election. I remember talking to you about the book, and you said it wasn't so much cheated, like law breaking, but it's that the rules were changed in advance, and they were done through legislatures or through courts. So it wasn't so much like in the middle of the night stealing ballots, but in broad daylight, rigging the rules, changing the rules, relaxing the rules. I think that was your thesis, if I remember it. I'm really worried about that.
Several other things. There was the censorship on social media, which has now begun to unravel.
Right.
There was the violence in the streets.
Right.
In 40, 50 large U.S. cities, we saw riots, which were fomented by the left against authorities, but also against Donald Trump. That had a massive impact. And the changing of the rules, ostensibly because of the pandemic. Now, there was never any scientific evidence that going to a polling place was any more dangerous than going to the grocery store. But Democrats managed to convince judges who were terrified of sending people to their deaths at the ballot box. They convinced judges to change the voting rules. What happened, though, was Republicans managed, even though Trump lost the election, Republicans managed to win enough state legislatures that they were able to tighten voting rules that had been liberalized in 2020. So now Democrats are going to court again at this late hour to try to change the voting rules. In fact, in Pennsylvania, which is very closely contested, Democrats are in federal court trying to argue that ballots that arrive by mail should be counted even if they don't have a date on them. You can imagine the potential for fraud that involves, that you could just have anybody fill out a ballot and just claim that it was sent today. And then, so, they're still trying that same old trick, but I think there have been more defenses built up against it.
Sheila, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, Joel, we're sort of seeing voters wake up in New York. They're seeing the crime, inflation, and Lee Zeldin has tightened up the race there. What, I guess, Ezra sort of described you as a anthropologist watching the Democrats around you. What is the problem with California? Because all these bad Democrat policies, they manifest themselves in the worst possible ways in California. Immigration, crime, Soros-backed prosecutors, climate policies, driving inflation, consistently the highest gas prices in the country month after month after month, and yet Democrats continue to win the day. I guess my question is there ever going to be a reckoning for these people in California?
Well, yes, there is going to be a reckoning. There may be a reckoning this year in Los Angeles. We have a very close race between Democratic Congresswoman Karen Bass, who's running for mayor, and billionaire developer Rick Caruso, who used to be a Republican but changed his party registration first to independent and then to Democrat. So you've got this all Democrat contest for mayor. We have a funny system of primary elections in California where the top two vote receivers in the primary election advance to the general election regardless of party. So we have a lot of races in which Democrats are running against each other. But you have this reckoning that's happening because Karen Bass is the darling of the Democratic Party establishment, and she has offered nothing new in this election. It's just business as usual, the party machinery. Her campaign has consisted of meeting with all the various interest groups in Los Angeles, the ethnic groups, the unions, and showing the public that she has their support. Nobody cares. What people care about is crime. They care about homelessness. They care about inflation. They care about the cost of housing. That's what Rick Caruso is talking about. I actually went, in an anthropological sense, as Ezra says, I went to a Karen Bass rally, and she talked about abortion. Well, local government has nothing to do with abortion. She talked about climate change. There is nothing Los Angeles can do about climate change, except maybe put some more sand on the beaches if the sea level rises, but we're not going to have any impact on climate change, no matter how many Teslas people have in West Los Angeles. So she was talking about global issues, national issues, but not about the local issues. So there is a reckoning. Now, why can't Republicans win statewide in California? And look, they might do better this time. There are a couple of good Republican campaigns. Lanhee Chen is a young Asian American Republican who is running a very, very good campaign for controller. That's sort of like the auditor of the state government. But it's very difficult because the Republican brand is toxic in California. Republicans are associated culturally, not, of course, in reality, but in a cultural sense by Hollywood and Silicon Valley with racism, with religious conservatism. And those are things that Californians obviously don't like. Nobody likes racism, but California also has a libertine social culture. People really like to live however they want. LGBT lifestyles are not just tolerated, but celebrated. And Republicans are cast as the opposite of all that. So it's the letter R after a candidate's name that basically dooms them. But voters in California really don't like what's happening. And none of the statewide leaders, indeed, not even Kamala Harris, who has now been elevated from senator to vice president, of course, none of them has any real depth of support. They have broad support because of the D after their name. But if there's a good Democrat who challenges one of them, then you have a horse race. And that's what we have here in Los Angeles. So we are very eager to see the results of this mayoral election, because if Rick Caruso can win, he really could at least begin to have an impact on the problems Los Angeles is facing. And he certainly will shake up the political establishment. It's interesting, just on this cultural note, Hollywood celebrities are split in this race. If you look at Breitbart.com at some of our entertainment coverage, you've got Katy Perry, Gwyneth Paltrow, some real A-list people in film and music who are supporting Rick Caruso and not Karen Bass. So the celebrities will take the opposite side of the Democratic Party establishment if the other candidate is also a Democrat, basically.
I'm not sure that makes me like Caruso. If Hollywood likes him, that makes me apprehensive of him all of a sudden.
Well, keep in mind, someone like Gwyneth Paltrow, for example, let me say something very nice about her. And I should just also disclose that I have friends who are in business with her. So, that might affect my perception of her. But she is a businesswoman. She doesn't just rely on from the screen. She relies on sales of consumer products to customers. So right. She is actively engaged in the reality of the American consumer. And she understands what people are going through because it affects her bottom line as well. She's not just expecting to get cast in something and then show up on Oscar night and take home a golden trophy. I mean, she's really got a lot of substance as a business person, and she's really thinking about these issues. And many people in the business community in Los Angeles are terrified about what's happening to the city. So they are also lining up behind Caruso. Not everybody. There are other people who are supporting Karen Bass for various reasons. And look, I have to say this about Karen Bass. I don't think she has any new policy ideas, but she is a very nice person. And she was one of the only Democrats, despite her left-wing communist supporting background, who opposed the tearing down of statues. So she is at least able, if she does win, to say nice things, present a nice face for the city, I think. But I don't think she's going to change anything. I don't think anybody expects her to either.
Ezra, you said Joel was fair, and look at him go.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons why he's so credible. Sometimes when you go in with an ideological mindset, which I often do, the mind subconsciously rejects facts that do not accord with the theory. I mean, I try and keep an open mind, but I am generally repulsed by the woke hard left. And I just saw a CNN exit poll that said 73% of Americans are appalled by the direction. Let me get the exact wording. I don't want to get this wrong. 73% of voters are dissatisfied or angry about the way things are going tonight. 73% are dissatisfied or angry, whereas 5% are enthusiastic. This is CNN. In fact, it's Jeffrey Toobin. I'm always surprised they allow him back on TV. So, I mean, that's just such a stunning number. Very interesting. Joel, we'll let you go. We're grateful for your time. Great to see you again. Thanks for your sober-minded analysis as always.
Thank you. And of course, the bigger question that will be raised tomorrow when we have the results in and see how big the Republican wave really was is, of course, around Donald Trump's political future. And right now, he looks like the only candidate that can take the nomination. Ron DeSantis was reelected today in Florida, and that's a very interesting result, too, because he won Miami-Dade County. And if you know Miami, it's very Democratic. It's 70% Hispanic. It voted for Hillary Clinton by 30 points in 2016, but Ron DeSantis has won, according to the latest results, by about 9 points in Miami-Dade. So that's a 40-point swing. So he's obviously shown some ability to win in formerly Democratic areas. It's just not clear that he has the national pull that Trump does. And of course, Trump is the one who endorsed DeSantis and elevated him to the governor's mansion. So it would be very awkward for DeSantis to challenge him. That wouldn't prevent him from doing so, but it would turn the Republican primary into something of a family feud. And I don't think that it would come out stronger for it. So it looks like Trump is the likely Republican nominee. There was a very important development over the weekend. Senator Tom Cotton, who's a very, very good senator, and one of the few Republicans who doesn't owe anything at all to Donald Trump. He started his political career before Trump, and he was never appointed by Trump to anything. He was going to run for president, and he decided not to do it. And he's very young. He's my age. We actually went to college together. So he's got 20 years to consider running for president, maybe even more. But he has decided to bow out. So now all of the other alternative candidates are people who owe their careers in some way or another to Donald Trump. I don't think that is going to be an easy way into a challenge against Trump. So the Republican primary looks almost like it's ended before it's begun. We'll see. It's all over bar the shouting, as they say. There'll be a lot of shouting, and we'll probably have debates and things like that. But Donald Trump right now has positioned himself as the party's likely presidential nominee in 2024, especially when you consider that a lot of the candidates who are going to win are people he endorsed, and often did so quite controversially. We'll see. We'll see how it pans out in Ohio and Pennsylvania and the rest. But very, very interesting questions about 2024 that we are going to ask in a day or two.
Give me 30 seconds on Georgia. What do you think is going to happen there?
It's hard to say. I think Herschel Walker looks like he has the edge, actually. He did exceptionally well in the debates. The media made fun of him because he sounds funny. He has a country accent. And our liberal elites consider that to mean that he is stupid. But he's not stupid. All of his answers were very good. He also was quite sharp in his attacks. They really pinpointed the weaknesses of the incumbent, who had nothing to say. And the problem for most of these Senate candidates, including the incumbent in Georgia, Raphael Warnock, is that they're all tied to Biden's policies. With the exception of Kyrsten Sinema, who's not up for re-election in Arizona, and Joe Manchin, who's also not up for re-election in West Virginia, nobody ever disagreed with Biden about anything. Those were the only two senators who ever put up a fight about anything. And so the rest of them are all stuck. So Raphael Warnock is stuck defending terrible policies. He wants to pack the Supreme Court. He wants to allow abortion until birth. All of these things are unpopular in Georgia, but they're all things that Biden has embraced. So that's really what has allowed Herschel Walker to pull ahead. He's also been very tenacious, and he's endured all sorts of personal attacks. They brought up past relationships, allegations that he asked girlfriends to get abortions and things like that. Not that that was illegal. It does conflict with his current stance on abortion, but I think Republican voters in Georgia just don't care about that at the moment. They just want to get the Democrats out of control. And Herschel Walker is a vehicle for that, and he's actually held up pretty well. So I think that he actually has an edge. He may even win outright. Of course, Georgia has a weird system where if you don't win 50%, then there's a runoff election. He may win without the runoff. We'll have to see what happens when the results come in.
Well, thanks again.
Sorry to interrupt. It looks like Kemp is pulling ahead of Abrams by 3.5 points. So that means 4 years of election denial.
Abrams is going to take up her natural calling, which is as an MSNBC political analyst, but her political career is over.
Thank goodness.
Well, what a great night. Very interesting. Joel, thanks so much. We'll let you get back to things. Watching this a big night. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, there you have it. Joel Pollak, Senior Editor at Large of Breitbart.com. So interesting. I'm starting to take a peek.
Freedom in 2022 is your right to disagree with me anytime on anything, in your heart, online, or in the public square. Freedom in 2022 is also your right to live your life however you see fit without hurting me or, for that matter, being bothered by me. But freedom in 2022 is in very real danger under constant attack by Justin Trudeau through his censorship bills, his attacks on gun rights, his attacks on farmers, and his attacks on peaceful protesters. These people have even tried to denormalize our flag. At Rebel News, we're not afraid to have dangerous discussions that Justin Trudeau, the media, and big tech censors say we're not allowed to have. And we want to have them with you at our upcoming Rebel Live events, first in Toronto, November 19th, and again in Calgary, Saturday, November 26th. I'll be there with dozens of other Rebels and Rebel-adjacent free thinkers, and I hope that you'll join us. Just go to rebelnewslive.com to get your tickets today, but do not sleep on this, because these tickets are going fast. See you soon.